Hello everyone, and welcome to a video on the Casio CTX 3000 keyboard. And in this video I'm going to be showing you how to send MIDI bank and program data to the CTX so that we can control the sound from a DAW and a remote keyboard. I've created an arrangement of some traditional Christmas carols in a kind of jig or bouncy rhythm for flute, violin, cello and piano sounds, and I'll show you the steps to achieve a final audio mix within a DAW. One of the things I really like about the keyboard is the number of built-in tones that are available at the touch of a button or two. You haven't got to wait ages to load up software or set up hardware and wait for that to get ready. You just turn on the keyboard. Within a few seconds you've got a wide range of tones at your fingertips, and it's very straightforward really to find those tones on the keyboard. I've shown you in other videos you can use the categories that are listed here and the category button. You can use the data wheel to just scroll through different sounds. And you can also just type in a 3-digit number and you'll get to another sound straight away. In contrast, if you're working with a PC in a DAW and you're using virtual instruments, you've got to load everything up, connect this to that before you can actually start making music. Admittedly, VST instruments, virtual instruments, are generally much better sound quality, and when it comes to mixing you can quickly export the track as a convenient WAV or MP3 file. And then also for deeper sound shaping, VSTs win hands down every time. But it swings and roundabouts, and if you've got a CTX, I'm just showing you really how to get more out of the instrument connected up to a PC. So this is a kind of halfway house setup, which I've shown in other videos, where the CTX sound is the sound source, and we're going to be using a sequencer or DAW to record and play back the sounds of the keyboard. I've connected the Casio using the USB connection here, and then I've also got a connection for the audio into my audio interface on the back of the keyboard as well. One issue I want to show in this video is how to access the tones remotely from within the sequencer DAW. I'm using a program called Reason, so I won't actually be touching the front panel of the keyboard itself. We'll be sending MIDI data over to the keyboard. So let's go over to the PC and I'll show you how it's all going to operate. So over on my desk I've got this small controller keyboard connected into the PC, which is then connected into the Casio. So I'm able to play the tones of the Casio from this remote keyboard here on the desk. The keyboard itself is situated on the far side of the room. So we'll be able to control not just the notes but also the program changes as well, and select tones from within our DAW as well. Before we go any further, it's worth having a look at the Appendix, which is this folded up sheet of paper which contains all the tones and their numbers. So if you're just using the keyboard on its own and you're typing in a particular number to find a sound, then you'll find that listed here. But for us with the DAW, we want to look at some of these other columns. So it's column 4 is a program change number, and column 5 is the bank select MSB, and MSB stands for most significant byte. It's one of several controller messages, also called CCs, that are used in MIDI which are called control changes or CCs, that the keyboard will recognize when we send it those messages. So we'll have a look at that as we set up. Another thing just to point out, if you haven't noticed it already, is at the back of the manual of the Casio there's this MIDI implementation chart which will show you which MIDI messages it will transmit and which ones it will recognize as well. That's fairly important, but not too important for what we're going to do in this video. So now let's get into recording and setting up for connections with the Casio. So this is the sequencer page in Reason, and down the left hand column you can see the tracks that I've created for each part of my arrangement, and then across from about the third to the right hand side is the main area where we will record data and playback data, and at the bottom of the screen is the transport selection. So if I press play, you'll see the cursor move across, and press stop and it stops, press stop again, it goes back to the beginning. So any data that we record here will be played back from here and then sent out to the Casio. The way to connect this keyboard to the Casio, so this is the piano sound from the Casio. And I've connected it via this keyboard via USB into the computer. The Casio is connected via USB. And in Reason, the way to set this up is to set up a MIDI out device. So if I go to the rack page, which is here, you can see all the MIDI out devices that have been created for each track on the sequencer page. And in each MIDI out device there's a program number which will send out a program change. At the moment this first one is set to 1, so that's why it's playing piano and not flute. Underneath that is a MIDI channel, and I've just set MIDI channel number 1 to track number 1, MIDI channel 2 to track number 2, and so on. So there are 4 main tracks of instruments with the first 4 MIDI channels. The last one is actually MIDI channel 10 because this is the metronome. I'm using the Casio drum sounds as my metronome. And on all of these MIDI out devices, here is where you would set up, connect up to the Casio. So you want to select a MIDI driver that says Casio USB MIDI. So that's what's sending the data. That's where the data will be going down the cable to the Casio. Let's go back to the sequencer. In Reason, you can create little blocks or large blocks of data, like maybe a verse and a chorus and a bridge, that you then stitch together to make your complete piece of music. So these are called blocks, and for this piece of music I've created a block that is purely for the MIDI data, and I've called it automation. Let's go in a bit deeper and have a look at the first track for Casio 1 flute. So at the moment you can hear it's not playing a flute, it's playing a piano tone. And in fact there's no note data recorded here. I've just created blocks for MIDI data, or lanes for MIDI data. The first lane is a program change. The next one is CC0, which is the MSB, most significant byte. And if you remember from the appendix, this is found in your appendix list from column number 5. So if a MSB says 4, then you've got to set this value to 4. And then I've set up another CC lane. This is for reverb. CC91 controls reverb, and I'm turning off the reverb on all of these tracks so that when I come to record the audio from the Casio, I'm recording a dry sound without any reverb, so that I can add the reverb in the DAW. Let's take an even further deeper look at this information here. So I'm just going to double click. So this is the program change lane, and these little white and then black circles represent the values, and I'm sending a value of 0, or rather 1 to begin with, and then 1 to 8, just sweeping through all the values before ending up on the value that I want, which is 74 for a flute. Before that, I send the MSB, the bank value, and again sending a full sweep before ending up on bank value 32. And the reason for doing this sort of full sweep is that the Casio isn't very responsive sometimes. If you just send the data that you want to send, it kind of seems to fall asleep or not catch what you're after. So just by sending a full range of data and then settling on the value that you want seems to work. And then finally this reverb lane does a similar thing, sends from a 0 to a 127 value range before settling on 0 again, because I want the reverb turned to 0. Notice how this data moves one after the other. First of all, the bank is sent here, then it's the program change, and then it's the reverb. And also I've done that for each of the tracks, and you'll see that they all come one after the other, so they're not all on top of each other, which again could end up with confusing the keyboard if too much data arrives at once. So at the moment we've got a piano tone. If I press play on the sequencer, it'll send out the data. And now if I play the keyboard, you can hear that we've got a flute tone here. If I go to the other tracks, we should have violin. And on track number 3, the cello. Track 4 is for piano. And then this other track is just for the metronome. So this is just a drum kit. And I'm using some sounds from here to create a metronome. If I go to my song, you can see the automation block is here at the beginning of the song, and then it's followed by all the different musical sections and different tunes that are happening in this arrangement, so that I know at the very beginning of the song it will send all that data, and then the tracks will play with the right sounds. So let's just have a little listen to the beginning of this arrangement. Nothing will happen to begin with, but it'll be sending the data out, and then it will start with the music. music playing, and the cursor's moving from left to right, playing the blocks of music. And so on. So I've shown you how to set up the tracks, and then it's just a case of recording and creating your piece of music. I've more or less finished this arrangement. I'm just going to record this violin part that goes into the interlude section. So I've got my music ready, I've got the sound ready on the keyboard. The metronome is ready to play as well, so it'll give me a 2-bar count in, and the other parts will play whilst I'm recording the violin. And that's recorded, and if we expand that, you can see the little notes have appeared, little dashes indicating that I've recorded notes. We can go in and edit those notes if we need to, change velocities, change pitch, change the length of the notes. So this is so much easier and more flexible than you would be able to do really from within the Casio sequencer. So I've shown you how to set up the connections to get MIDI from a remote keyboard like this one into the DAW and then back out to the Casio. I've shown you how to select banks and program changes, and even to set the reverb controller messages as well. I could leave it at that. We've got the song completed. I could create a MIDI file from my song and even play that MIDI file on the Casio. But I want to go a stage further. I want to record the audio from the keyboard into the DAW, and then I can add reverb and other effects and balance the sounds and create a final mix, and which will be a WAV file or even an MP3 file that I can play back on other devices, even play back through the CTX itself and play along with a backing track. So let me show you how I'm going to do that. So first of all, I'm going to go to the automation block that I was showing you earlier and take a look at the flute track. So here's the program change, the CC0 bank select, the CC91 reverb lanes. I'm going to add a pan lane. Pan allows you to shift the sound from left to right, and what I want to do is to shift this sound to the left hand side. So CC number 10 is for pan. That creates a lane here. I can just copy data from one of these other lanes because that's the sort of data I want to use, and then I can edit it. I want it to appear after all the other data, and if I just make this a bit bigger for you as well, I've copied some data and then just dragged it into the lane for pan, and again it's showing you how it's sweeping through values, and I want it to finish on a value of 0. In Reason there are static values here. I could just simply put in a static value of 0, but I've found again the Casio doesn't always respond to those messages immediately. So that's why I'm putting in these blocks of automation, sweeping through and then ending up on the value that I want to use. So now we've got all this data sorted. Let's just zoom out again. And if I play the keyboard, we've got a piano sound. But if I send the data to the Casio, we should now have a piano voice, a flute sound pan to the left. So that's sounding good. I'm going to do the same thing for the violin track as well. Add a CC10 pan lane as well. Copy the data from another one, shift it down, change the value. But this time I want the value to be 127. So I'm going to get rid of this last dot there. And if I play back the data for the violin and play the keyboard, you should hear the violin on the right hand side. So what this allows me to do now is when I set up audio tracks, because my audio interface has two channels, a left and a right channel, I can send the flute to record on the left, can send the violin to record on the right at the same time, and it just saves a little bit of time because I'm recording in mono. So you can see I've added some pan data to each of my tracks now. So the flute, the violin, the cello and the piano are all going to be panned hard left or hard right, so that when I come to record the audio I can do two tracks at a time, one on the left, one on the right. And the way to do this is to set up an audio track. In different DAW software the approach is slightly different. In Reason you've actually got to create an audio track, and you can do that just by going create audio track or up to the menu here, Control T. So we've created an audio track. You can see from the little green LEDs going back and forth my voice is coming in, so that shows there's a signal coming in. I'm going to label this Casio flute audio. And I'm going to make sure that it's mono and it's going to be recording the input on channel 1. My audio interface is a stereo interface, a left and a right, 1 and 2 channel interface. Let's create another audio track. Call this one Casio Violin Audio. And this time mono again, but to input 2. So anything on the right side will be recorded into this channel. Anything on the left will be recorded into this one. At the moment my voice is left and right, so that's why we're seeing both of these showing some signal coming in. I want to mute all the parts I don't want to record. There's nothing on this first one anyway, but I'll mute it. I don't want to record cello yet, I don't want to record piano, and I don't want to record the metronome. Let's find a little section to record. So I'm going to record the flute and violin in the interlude first of all. I need to select record enable on both of the tracks, so you're arming the tracks ready for recording, and then it's a case of just hitting record on the transport or control and return. But I want to make sure that I'm not recording my voice, so I'm going to mute my own microphone as well. And then away we go. and you can see now we've got 2 lanes of audio data that have been recorded, but you may have noticed that there's some reverb in there, and I've found this to be the case is that the Casio, for some reason, or maybe it's the software Reason, seems to reset itself. So I'm going to have to do that all again. Let's delete these tracks, or delete the data that's on the tracks. I'm going to go back to my automation block and just resend the MIDI data to make sure that my flute and my violin sounds are dry without any keyboard reverb. So the flute sounds dry, the violin sounds dry. We'll go back to the interlude and we'll now record the interlude. So those 2 audio tracks have been recorded. The signal level isn't too strong, but it's not too weak either. It's about right. Maybe I could have increased it a bit more. But if that's a problem, you can just normalize the tracks. So in Reason, that's press the right button and normalize. And normalize. What this does is it brings up the peaks to their maximum without clipping or distorting. Just gives us a much stronger signal. And I'm going to do that once more. I'm going to create 2 audio tracks and then record the cello and the piano parts. Here we go. And now that's been recorded, I can normalize these clips as well. And although it's going to be a rough mix, we can have a listen back to these audio recordings. Just going to take the mixer levels down a little bit. And I'll make a group as well so that it's easier just to control. All the audio tracks with one slider here. Let's press play. So there are the 4 audio tracks. I can now edit those, trim them a little bit, put some reverb on, and start to mix my whole song. But I'll leave that for another video. Thanks for watching.